everyone. Sorry I'm not with you this weekend. And for our Dvar Halacha, let's talk about going to Minyan. Is it an obligation or a virtue? Common wisdom would say it's an obligation, and that's the position of Rav Moshe Feinstein. It's an absolute obligation to go to Minyan. He bases it on, amongst other things, the Shulchan Aruch that says exactly how far do you need to go in order to go to a Minyan. 4 mil in front of you, 1 mil if you already passed it, which implies that it is a mitzvah and an obligation to go to Minyan. However, when the Shulchan Aruch codifies this, he doesn't say you must go to Minyan, but rather, Yishtadel Adam lihitpalel beveit hakneset im hatzibur. You should try to daven in a shul with a minyan. He doesn't say chayav. He doesn't say asr not to. He says yishtadel. Based on that, many poskim said that davening in a minyan is a virtue, is a value, but an obligation it is not. And let's start way back at the Maharil, talking about Rav Yaakov Mulin, 1360 to 1427, and he says, Lo ra'a b'shum posek, shemutar la'arev tchumin, leilech lebeit hakneset, kedei lihitpalel ba'asara. He has never seen in any posek that you can do an eruvei tchumin, namely leave the tchum of Shabbos 2,000 mil, and then put there a box of matzahs, and then walk another 2,000 mil, in order to daven in a minyan. Why? Lihitpalel ba'asara not kol kach mitzvah. Because davening in a minyan is not so much of a obligation, from the word mitzvah, tzivui. You can have the same kavanah when he's home. On his feet, as they say, many others agreed with him. For example, the Shud Yad Eliyahu B'Rabbi Shmuel, lived from 1660 to 1740. He was born in Poland, rabbi of many communities. He says, if a person has to daven in a minyan, even if it means losing some money and waiting, because he gets up early in the morning, so it means he has to wait. He codifies going to minyan as a midat chasidut, pious thing to do. Obligation, no. Pious thing to do. So if the Maharil said it's not so much of a mitzvah, looking in Rabbi Eliyahu B'Rabbi Shmuel, he says it's less than a mitzvah. It's only a midat chasidut. Later on in history, the Emek Bracha, Rav Aryeh Pomeramchik, lived from 1908 to 1942. He learned in Brisk. He was very close to the Brisker Rav and to the Chazon Ish. Klal Chiyuv, it's not an obligation. How do we know this? Because the famous Gemara in Brachot says, the Gemara in Brachos, Daf Zayin Amud Bet and Techet Amud Aleph, Rav Yitzchak says to Rav Nachman, how come you don't go to shul? And he says, Lo yachilna. Rashi says, Tashoch kochi. Don't have the koach. The Magen Avraham explains, Shetash kocho afapi she'eno choleh. He wasn't sick. If he was sick, of course he doesn't have to go to shul. Rather, he doesn't feel he has the koach. So, Rabbi Yitzchak says, maybe I should bring a minyan to you. He says, Tirchali milta, I'll have to clean the house. I don't want to do that. And maybe I should tell you when the minyan davens, so at least you'll daven at the same time. He says, what are you bothering me so much? So the Gemara brings all these various virtues about davening in a minyan, that it's an eit ratzon, it's an actual favorable time before God, and many other psukim talking about how beautiful and wonderful davening in a minyan is, and when everything's perfect, that's what we do. However, says Rav Pomeranchik, that if it was an obligation, mazotir chali milta, that I don't want to bother, how can you say that? Even if it's a little difficult, we do mitzvot. It's a little difficult to put on tefillin in the morning and get up. You still get up. It's a little difficult to get up before Zman Kriyat Shema. We still get up. What do you mean? Tircha li milta. It's a little bit of a tircha. Al korchenu muchach mizeh. Therefore, we have to learn from this that tefillah b'tzibur b'tzad atzma ina mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah. It's not an obligation. Lefichach en shum chiyuv liitpalel im hatzibur. There's no obligation to daven with a congregation. Since the Gemara says explicitly that God must listen to your prayers in a minyan, he may say no, but he has to listen a promise you don't have when you're davening alone. Therefore, the Shulchan Aruch was very, very pedantic. Lishtadel, try very hard, because that's the place where God will listen. However, if there's reasons that you can't, then you can daven alone. וכן מבואר בלשון הרמב"ם, ריש פרק ח' מתפילה, ולא יתפלל יחיד כל זמן שיכול להתפלל עם הציבור. Don't daven alone if you could daven in a minyan, but if you can't, namely, if it's difficult, mura lehedja she'no chiyuv klal le'ishtadut shetukubal tfilato, and that's the position of Rav Osher Weiss in our generation, and I quote his words, shekol hasiba she'adam nitpalel im hatzibur, eno mishum shekach tiknu chachamim, there's no enactment of our sages to daven in a minyan, ela mishum shetfilatot atzivat hatzibur nishmat, rather because the prayers of the congregation are definitely heard, and therefore, the famous Shulchan Aruch that says how far you have to walk in order to daven in a minyan, he says, is not a proof. Why? The gambazeni repashut, the kishem shetzarich yishtadel bekoch hachol yitpalel betzibur, kach tzarich avcharech daled mil. Since the Shulchan Aruch said yishtadel, he tells you what it means to yishtadel, but an obligation it is not. And just to give one more ramification of this, the Chavot Yair Rav Yair Bachrach, 1638 to 1702, writes a tshuva about some rich guy who lived near a certain town where there was no minyan, and very simply on Shabbos morning he can make a deal before Shabbos with the people that run the boats to take him over from where he lives to the place that there is a minyan that you can only get to with a boat. Now, a boat on Shabbos is a derabanan. Asking a non-Jew to do something for you is derabanan. This is what we would call shvut deshvut, two derabanans, b'makom mitzvah. Mitzvah to go daven in a minyan. Says Rav Yair Bachrach, no. The Rabbanim didn't allow it, and I won't allow it, even though it's just a shvut deshvut. Why? Lihitpalel ba'asara ina mitzvah kula hai. It's not a mitzvah. So you can't say shvut deshvut bimkom mitzvah. He quotes the Maharil we already quoted and says going to a wedding is a mitzvah. Sameach chatan v'kala. But going to minyan is not a mitzvah, but rather a very important value. It's a value of the nikdashti betoch b'nei Yisrael, you shall be sanctified within the Jewish people. You say Kaddish, Kedusha, Baruch Hu, Amen Yehi Shmei Rabbah. But having said all of that, im kol zeh, eino mitzvah, aseh deramli aleha, gam lo nitpatel im yamod chutza. If on Sukkot you eat outside the sukkah, that's called a bitul mitzvah taseh. If you wear a four-cornered garment without tzitzis, that's a bitul mitzvah taseh. But if you don't go to minyan, it is not. So as we can see today, no one puts down the value of a minyan. It is extremely important. Having said that, a mitzvah, according to these poskim, from the Maharil, the Chavot Yair, and many others, it is not. So if this is the case, I think we should value minyan very, very much. It is something that has so much value to it. But under certain circumstances, the Shulchan Aruch says, yishtadel, and no more.
Hassecho asher yisodeni